castaway this week is Piers Morgan. A Fleet Street editor before he was 30, he spent more than a decade at the helm of first the News of the World and then the Mirror. He pioneered a style of journalism that fed off the day-to-day lives of celebrities and won a fistful of awards for his scoops that exposed their extramarital affairs. By his own admission, he relished the feuds he fought. So when the fall from grace came, there were plenty of people rubbing their hands with glee. First were allegations of dodgy dealing, buying shares in a firm his own newspaper was about to tip. Then he published false pictures of British soldiers abusing Iraqi prisoners. Well, since then, he's written a very well-received memoir, forged a successful career as an interviewer, and latterly has become something of a television celebrity, both here and in America. He is, according to one friend, the ultimate proof that self-confidence and self-belief can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You were just 28 years old then when Rupert Murdoch handed you the reins of the News of the World. What do you remember of that moment? Was it a formal interview?
No, funnily enough, I have very vivid memories because I was back in Miami for the first time since I got given the job only 2 weeks ago. I was the pop editor of The Sun. I was 28. Kelvin Mackenzie was editor of the paper and just said, the boss wants to see you. Here are your tickets. And Murdoch met me and then said, let's go for a walk on the beach. And we actually both took our shoes and socks off and walked through the surf of Miami Beach for about 2 or 3 hours.
That has an air of the surreal about it already.
It was extremely surreal. And because I had an inkling that it might be a new job of some sort, but I had no idea what, I'd actually bought every serious magazine I could possibly find at the airport on the way out to Miami. And blissfully, this was all that kept coming up. It was like, what do you think of Clinton then? I said, well, I think what he's doing in Sierra Leone is really quite disturbing, Mr. Murdoch, and so on. So trying to drag myself away from this terrible, stereotypical, brash young pop editor. And it must have worked because we finished this walk and then he said to me, right, we're going to go to a party tonight for all the Fox television affiliate stations. And I found out I got the job when he introduced me to one of his top executives in America with the words, this is my friend Piers Morgan. He's the new editor of the News of the World.
That was it?
That's how I found out. And he just looked at me and winked.
Did you phone your mum?
I phoned my mum, who was, to be perfectly honest, was quite torn between obvious delight at this amazing promotion for me and utter horror that it was the News of the World. This was a family where we had, very middle-class Sussex family where the papers we got were the Daily Mail and the Sunday Times, and that was it.
It seems ridiculous that I'm about to ask you, Piers Morgan, this question, but did you ever wonder that you were up to the job?
I wondered every day if I was up to the job. Editing the News of the World with its premium on exposure and scandal and all that kind of thing, I didn't know if I was really kitted out to do that kind of thing. I was younger than anybody else in the newsroom. And I could see all these older guys looking at me, and I just overheard one of them saying, good God, he's younger than my grandson. And I remember looking at him and laughing, and they were all just waiting for me to get it wrong.
Tell me about your first disc. What have you chosen?
The first disc is really the record that used to get me up to edit newspapers. It's called Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones, and I used to genuinely play this almost every morning before I got into my shower, and it just has that kind of energising, reviving magic to it. By the time it finished, I was ready for another day in the war zone.
Stones and Start Me Up, and played each morning, Piers Morgan. Did you say you were in the shower? You would play that to get you going
naked,
as you went in.
Water thrashing.
Probably more information than I needed, but to get you going, to go in and edit the News of the World. And you said that your mother, apart from sort of understanding that somehow she should be proud, also she and the rest of your family slightly horrified because they were a Daily Mail reading typical
military family, and it was, none of them were exactly jumping for joy because this was not a paper that any of them read. So it was almost like the ultimate good news and bad news. My brilliant son's been made editor of a national newspaper at 28. What's the bad news? It's the News of the World. And
you were part of a big, lively family, plenty of brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and I'm the least opinionated one of the lot of them. So Christmases can get extremely hostile. Very opinion. All the family are very strong characters, very opinionated, especially on my mother's side. My grandmother's a wonderful matriarch.
And so, around the family table at lunchtime or whatever, would you have at Sunday lunch a good old Barney about politics? And
yeah. Always, and really quite aggressive. It would when I was younger, it would often end with me and my immediate younger brother, who's an army colonel now. We'd often come to blows,
And little Piers, what was little Piers like?
Well, I asked my mother about this. She said you were just a very happy chap, always smiling, always having fun, quite creative. Had a sort of irrational interest in newspapers for a young boy. So I was 6 or 7 and reading the Daily Mail every day, which can't be good for your health. I had an incredibly happy childhood. We never had a lot of money. My parents both worked very, very hard, ran a country pub down in East Sussex and worked 7 days a week. And despite the fact they had these 4 kids and worked so hard, we just had an incredibly, from my memory, incredibly blissful time.
It strikes me your mother must have been a very strong, positive character. You were saying you were a positive little boy because the man who brought you up as dad and who is essentially your dad had not in fact fathered you because your father had died. Yeah. So she must be quite a powerhouse to sort of manage to engender optimism in her children, in her family.
Yeah, I mean, my mum, my father died when I was just 1 year old, and my mum remarried a few years later, and I was very lucky that she married someone who took on these 2 boys, as it was at the time, and became the only dad I've ever known, obviously. But I think the great powerhouse has always been, my mother and my grandmother. 2 of the strongest women you'd meet who've been through a lot of very difficult things. Tell me about your next piece of music, then. The next piece was kind of a tribute, really, to all these extraordinary females in my life. So it's Charles Aznavour's For Me Formidable, and I think and For Me Formidable, I can't quite roll my R's the way you did there. So Piers Morgan, as a little boy, I don't know why I'm saying this, incredibly competitive, I'm imagining. Yes, very competitive. Yeah, well, the whole family were. I think if you have 2 brothers, then every day is another war. You said there wasn't much money around. You were sent to boarding school at 8, so enough money to do that. Yeah, I was actually a day boy until I was 11 or 12. Oh, right. And then I decided I wanted to be a weekly boarder after that. So I only got incarcerated at my own volition. But I went to a fantastic prep school down in East Sussex. Did you write for the school newspaper? We didn't really have one. What we did have, we had this wonderful lady called Nancy Milner-Gullen who had a discussion group every week. And it would just be one huge Barney. It would be like a sort of young version of Question Time. And I'm sure that a lot of the way I am now, and the fact that I love that kind of debating and sort of polarising opinion, all that kind of thing, that all came from those days where we were just encouraged to be very, very forceful and animated and hopefully informed and articulate in our argument. Did you have ambition for yourself at that age? Did you think, I want to be a whatever? I think that, in all honesty, I've never had any direct ambition for any of the jobs I've ended up doing. I think I had a love of newspapers, which was a bit weird for a boy of my age. So I think I had a love for that. I love the feel of newspapers, the smell of newspapers. So that was my real love and passion, and remains the case now. But I don't think I ever had a game plan. You had to also quit posh school and go to just the normal comprehensive. Yeah, that was a pretty big moment. I think it was a bigger moment for my mum than me, really. She just wanted me to go to public school. I got a bursary scholarship to Ardingly College, which ironically would have left me at the same school at the same time as Ian Hislop. So I think probably for the nation's sake, just as well that I was frog marched off to the local comp. But I honestly think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The friends I made there have become the closest friends in my life. Tell me about your next piece of music. The next piece, well, this always brings back really happy memories again. On Friday nights, my little routine at the Daily Mirror used to be that I would get my driver to pick up my kids, my 3 sons, and bring them to Canary Wharf, and then I would normally drive myself and them down to Sussex. And we just loved this song, and we'd all sing along. And some of the happiest memories I have with my kids were just sticking on this song, Dean Martin, and Hey Mambo, Mambo Italiano. I defy anyone to listen to this and not just feel slightly uplifted by life. Mambo Italiano. I'm going to... Well, this is an unfair thing to do, but journalists do it all the time, of course, don't they? Quote people back at themselves many years later. You once said, "There's no point in pretending what you're doing is good for the human spirit." This is of being a tabloid editor. "Most of the time, the public interest defence is trumped-up nonsense. The reason we're doing it is to sell papers and amuse and titillate people." Never a truer word was spoken. Probably. I think that's probably the honest truth about it, yeah. I think that as a tabloid editor, too often I heard them try and launch these defences of stuff when actually it's kind of more honest, just to be more straightforward and say your job is to sell newspapers. But lots of what tabloid newspapers do, somewhere along the line, someone's getting damaged by this. Now, a lot of the time it is defensible. Some of the times it isn't defensible at all. You mentioned that you almost ended up going to school with Ian Hislop. Who knows, maybe you would have been the best of chums, but that's certainly not the case now. You're somebody who relishes a feud, and you've had this ongoing feud with Ian Hislop, and very recently
he has said with a great deal of passion that one of the difficulties of trying to keep the freedom of the press intact is that it's been horribly degraded by people who go out essentially and rake through other people's love lives for a front page.
I know, but he's such a sanctimonious buffoon. I mean, the Private Eye is one of the most intrusive and inaccurate newspapers in the country. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Private Eye. I thoroughly enjoy reading it, as long as it's about somebody else, not me, like everybody who reads Private Eye. But I will not take lessons on any of those things from Ian Hislop.
Now, of course, Ian Hislop's not here to defend himself. We shouldn't get into too much of a personal slagging match about what he publishes and what you in the past have published. But
I'm just trying to put it into some sort of perspective.
Well, I'm wondering, as a 28-year-old then, when you were making decisions about what and essentially who you put on your front page, if any of that came into play, if you thought, well, this is a woman with children, or here's a man with a marriage that's on the edge of a precipice.
I mean, I think, look, to be honest with you, when I first started, I was 28, I was carefree, I didn't really give things much thought. I think that brought with it a bravado, courage and daring that you wouldn't get if you were 40, but it also brought a sense of slight abandonment about the reality of what you were doing to people. And I think that as I got a bit older and went through my own trials and tribulations, my view of the pleasure to be derived from that kind of thing began to diminish.
And what about this nice middle-class boy who would have to be dealing with, I mean, essentially people who rake through bins for a living, people who tap people's phones, people who take secret photographs, who do all that very nasty down-in-the-gutter stuff.
Yeah,
how did you feel about that?
Well, to be honest, let's put that in perspective as well. Not a lot of that went on. A lot of it was done. No, a lot of it was done by third parties rather than the staff themselves. That's not to defend it, because obviously you were running the results of their work. I'm quite happy to be parked in the corner of tabloid beast and to have to sit here defending all these things I used to get up to. And I make no pretense about the stuff we used to do. I simply say the net of people doing it was very wide and certainly encompassed the high and the low end of the supposed newspaper market.
Weren't you once at a lunch where, I mean, a very intimate lunch with Prince William, where he said, why was it that he was much younger then, of course, why was it that the papers had to be so horrible to Mummy?
Yeah.
What did you say to him?
Well, it was just me, him and Diana. And I thought it was a very good point to make. He was 13 and a half. I felt very sorry for Prince William, but I also did point out to him, not forcefully, he was a boy, but I said, look, you have to understand, your mother's one of the most famous people in the world. You are public property, I'm afraid, to a lot of extent, and you're just going to have to learn to live with it. But the easy thing for me to have done was look Prince William in the eye and say, well, leave your mum alone. But then he didn't know that his mum used to ring me up on a regular basis, giving me stories about herself to discredit her rivals. I did. So it was a two-way street.
Let's take a break for some music. What have you chosen next, Piers?
The next piece is actually, I'm a secret jazz fiend, and I was in New York about 3 months ago and just heard this guy, and I didn't know much about him. I knew vaguely that he was a great jazz saxophonist, a guy called Chris Potter, and he was just spellbinding. I could just imagine being on a desert island, hopefully with a big fat cigar, thinking about my life and listening to Yesterday by Chris Potter and thinking, you know what, life isn't too bad out here.
Chris Potter and Yesterday. That was an intriguing little picture you painted there, Piers Morgan, about sitting with William, aged 13 and a half, and his mother, Diana, in Kensington Palace, I presume it was, in her private apartments, having lunch. That's the sort of access that very, very few people get, and it's open to the editors of our daily and Sunday newspapers. It must be intoxicating.
Oh, completely. I found it extraordinary. I mean, I had amazing access to Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister.
Yes, in your book you say 56 times.
56 one-to-ones.
One-to-one, which is different, of course, from people in many positions in life meet Prime Ministers and Premiers at receptions and shake their hand and they exchange banalities. But actually, here you were, one-to-one. And what was he doing? Tony Blair was asking your opinion, trying to curry favour with you? He
was trying to formulate my opinion in my head to a benefit to himself. Of course he was. He was Prime Minister. He wanted the mirror to be on his side.
Did you have a bit of a crush on him?
Not a crush, no, Kirsty, no. I liked him a lot, personally, for a long time. I felt it was
you yourself have written that there was a sort of, not quite a homoerotic edge, but there was a little bit of a sort of, you both rather just loved being around each other.
Well, there was a certain three of us in this marriage thing, because I always used to be struck by the fact if I went in to see Tony Blair in Downing Street, that I'd always get a call from Gordon Brown's office almost before I got back to the office, inviting me in for tea or breakfast with Gordon the following day. So even then, the competition for Tony's affection, for Gordon's, it was all very complicated if you read it to the Daily Mirror, because they were all trying to vie for what I thought was my affection, but of course was in fact my front page.
Well, it's a front page love triangle splash, is it
exactly.
not, Piers? And what about then missing it? A little. I know you don't miss editing a newspaper, and I know you also think that journalists are obsessed with this idea that you want to go back to Fleet Street, for want of a better term. But missing the proximity to power, missing a word in the Prime Minister's ear here and there.
But I still get that. I mean, I've known Gordon longer than Tony Blair. So, I mean, I consider him and Sarah to be good friends of mine. And I talk to Sarah at least once a week. I talk to Gordon, every couple of months I might go in and have a chat with him. I have no agenda. I have no side to me. And I see him probably as much as I ever used to. So I still have that. I don't miss that side of things at all. Don't get me wrong. I pick up the paper some days. I still get 5 or 6 of them. And I think, God, I wish I was back in there today. What fun to be in there today, the day that Jackie Smith's husband had to hold his hands up to watching an adult movie and claiming it off the taxpayer. You just think, I wish I was in the newsroom today. It would be such fun.
What's your next piece of music, then?
It's actually one of the very few things that I can actually play on the piano. And I have, in fact, played this around the world whilst under the influence of alcohol, including one memorable performance in a nightclub in Dublin, where 300 people ended up chanting the chorus with me. It's the Beatles and Let It Be.
And Let It Be. In the introduction, Piers Morgan, I talked about some of your triumphs and also some of your tragedies, and probably, well, you say it might be the thing that people write when they write your obituary. The biggest mistake you made was the Viglen shares. You invested £67,000 of your own money in shares for a company that was the next morning tipped by your very own newspaper in the financial pages as one to invest in, and you came a cropper.
Yeah, big time. I mean, it wasn't ever how people thought it was. They'd actually tipped that company twice before in the previous 2 weeks, and the shares had already risen by over 30%. So it wasn't what it seemed. I was aware of how it looked, and I absolutely hated the way that it then played out in the media. It made me look like the Nick Leeson of Fleet Street, that I was filling my boots, using my newspaper to do this. I found it all horrific. I lost about a stone in weight, realised that this would then be with me forever, whatever the outcome of the investigation. But, all I can say is the Department of Trade and Industry launched a 4-year investigation, and at the end of it, they brought no charges against me or any allegations of wrongdoing whatsoever.
Is that when it all stopped being... I mean, you often do describe... I've heard you and read you in interviews saying, well, it's all a game anyway. And was that
Certainly
when it
wasn't a game then.
Was that when it stopped being a game for you, when you realised that actually you could not just lose your job, but lose your reputation?
It had that effect. It also gave me which was a positive thing out of it. It gave me a very good insight, I thought, into being on the receiving end of the attack dogs. I realised then what it was like to have people listening into your phone conversations. I was having paparazzi doorstep me, chase me down the street, shouting things.
And how did that feel?
It felt pretty uncomfortable. It felt pretty intimidating. I thought it was perfectly justified. I thought I put myself in an incredibly stupid position by buying any shares at all when I was editing a newspaper that ran a share tipping column. To me, the share dealing was just a bit of a laugh. I came a cropper very quickly, and it taught me a huge lesson. And I deeply regret ever buying those shares. I wish I'd never done it.
I wonder if you were living a life around about that time where, because of the atmosphere that surrounds particularly tabloid editors, and because of, as we've described, the access that you were given, and because of the chauffeur-driven cars and the nice paychecks and the big life, the big London life, if you sort of felt untouchable.
I think there is a bit of that. I think I certainly didn't give it any thought. And I think as a newspaper editor, you are living in a very high-octane, adrenaline-fueled life. I don't think you feel untouchable, but you feel incredibly powerful. You feel like you can almost do anything. You are, in terms of the newsroom, you're the God figure, and everything you say gets done, and you start to feel, fairly omnipotent. So, the share thing was just an incredibly difficult time for me, and I regret it deeply.
Let's have some music. What have you chosen?
This brings me neatly to Sunset Boulevard, which I think is a wonderful anthem, really, for everyone who dreams of going to Hollywood, about what the reality is of Hollywood, which is it's the land of dreams, but mainly broken ones. It is in many ways a horrible, sleazy cesspit of greed and gluttony and paranoia and insecurity and disgusting show-offs, which is probably why I feel so happy out there. And this is really the anthem of the young guy who goes out chasing the dream and kind of knows it's disgusting, but thinks, you know what, it's worth it. I want to be a star. And I heard it once when I was actually driving down Sunset Boulevard. And I just started laughing at the lyrics because I thought, yeah, this is kind of like me at the moment. You know, living a bit of a sleazy dream out here, but loving every second. And who cares if it all goes wrong? You can always say you were on Sunset Boulevard.
Alan Campbell as Joe singing Sunset Boulevard from the musical of the same name. We'll come on to your Hollywood dream a little later. But for now, let's concentrate on this decision then as the editor of the Mirror to be very much against the invasion of Iraq. Why did you make that decision?
I just got a sense from all the military people that I knew, and some of whom were in my family, that this Iraq war was not what it should be. That there was no belief amongst the army people I talked to that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction. So I didn't buy the argument. I thought it was wrong. And as it turned out, the Mirror was absolutely right.
Let's concentrate more on the reason that you were escorted from the building, the Mirror building. This is the photograph that you ran of an Iraqi prisoner of war being abused, being urinated upon by a British soldier.
Yeah.
Did nothing strike you as odd about that photograph? It was beautifully framed. It was not grainy. It seemed as if it had been taken with some care. It didn't really compare favourably to the ones that we knew were around.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I'm not an idiot. I may be many things, but I'm not stupid. And obviously we had checked these out thoroughly. You know, I have to assume that those pictures were a bit moody, as they say in the trade, and perhaps they weren't what they seemed to be. Although to this day, nobody has ever come up with any evidence as to what they really are, where they were taken, what they really depict, or anything. You know, I got unceremoniously fired on the word of the government, who had already been found wanting on the question of why we went to war in the first place, and on the word of the Queen's Lancashire Regiment, who since then have now seen some of the worst war crimes alleged against them of any regiment since the Second World War. And look at the case of Baha Musa, the hotel receptionist. That was the QLR. They beat this guy up for 3 days and killed him. Perfectly innocent guy. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I got fired by revealing, I believe, an absolute truth. Those pictures may not have been what we thought. The allegation behind them, absolutely true.
More than being unceremoniously frog-marched out the front of the building with your belongings in a black plastic bag where once you had been the editor who reigned supreme, more than that, surely the most bitter moment must have been the apology that was written.
Yeah, it made me physically sick.
It was on the front page of the newspaper?
Yeah.
Made you physically sick?
Maybe not physically, but it made me want to puke, definitely, yeah. It was all quite weird. It's like having an out-of-body experience. You know, you watch your own obituary on telly, and all I kept thinking was, in a rather selfish way, God, I've got 11 minutes at the top of the news. It's quite good.
What did your mother say to you about it all at the time?
My mother was incensed and upset and furious. You know, she has always been the most important figure in my life, incredibly supportive. And she knew that I'd published it absolutely believing the pictures to be genuine. I mean, this idea that somehow I would publish a picture that emotive at that time that I thought was even had a chance of not being genuine is just ridiculous.
Let's take a break. Tell me about your next piece of music, Piers.
The next piece of music is it's just a really lovely ballad. This is a great love song by the greatest singer, I think, in the world, Stevie Wonder. It happens to be a favourite song of my girlfriend Celia and I's, and it's just got really nice, simple lyrics, which are self-explanatory. And I actually met Stevie Wonder last summer in LA, and in a drunken moment of madness, I got him to record on video a marriage proposal to Celia with the criteria, should I ever need to use this? So I don't want her getting too excited if she hears this. So I actually have got Stevie Wonder now on tape ordering Celia to marry me. So should that moment ever come, and she'd be lucky enough to be in that position, Stevie will be doing the proposing, which is pretty cool, I think, whichever way you look at it.
And you and I hate to break the spell of romance, but the life of celebrity then, you are now, of course, a celebrity. You're one of those people you would have written about, that you would have splashed on your front page.
I'm one of those people I would have poured scorn on, ridiculed, and generally over-obsessed about, yeah. In the way that tabloids do.
What would you have found if you'd raked through the celebrity Piers Morgan's bins, I wonder?
Not a lot. I think I've always been quite an open book. Unlike a lot of celebrities and journalists, actually, the most thin-skinned people on God's earth, I think that I've always been quite open about my failings.
You're a father of 3 boys, of course, and you spend a lot of time over in America. Do you filming? I'm presuming you do a lot of film. You have to do all the judging for America's Got Talent, as well as over here in Britain, where you are one of the judges in the same show. How much time do you get to spend with your boys? Probably
more than when I was an editor, actually. Before, I would be getting up at 6 and getting home at midnight. You never saw your kids at all. So although I'm abroad a lot filming, when I'm in England, I can see them a lot more than I used to.
Do you have difficulty protecting your privacy?
I tend to invade my own privacy quite aggressively, so I don't think I'm worried too much about it.
So you say it all before anyone else can?
I couldn't give a damn about privacy. And I just find it such a ridiculous squealing argument from a bunch of pampered multimillionaire egotists. People hide behind their children in this kind of situation. They use them as a tool, normally when they've been rankly hypocritical and they have sold their kids on the front cover of a magazine for £50,000, sold their christening, sold their wedding. That's where you have to draw a line as a celebrity. How greedy do you want to be? And if you want to be greedy and sell your own privacy, you are not entitled to any privacy.
I'm glad you mentioned the wedding. Is it true that Celia Walden has turned you down repeatedly every time you proposed to her?
She'd like you to think that. No, I think, look, Celia, I think, is someone whoever ends up marrying her is going to be an extremely lucky guy. Let's just say I'm in a pretty good position at the moment. I've manoeuvred myself into pole position.
Are her parents now speaking to you? I gather you didn't really hit it off with her father.
I get on very well with her parents.
Do you?
Yeah. You shouldn't believe all you read in the papers, Kirsty. You, of all people, should know that.
What a fool I am. How are you going to be on the island? I imagine you will be chronically bored and maybe slightly depressed, a little bit...
Never depressed. I never get depressed about anything. No, I'm not...
I just mean being on your own, not having an audience, not having people to banter with, not being able to have the arguments about whether it's the latest celebrity making a fool of themselves or politics.
I'd miss people. I do like being around people. I think I like a good party. I like the buzz of a newsroom. I like the buzz of a big TV production. I like that. I like showing off as well. I don't think anything wrong with showing off. I think it's funny.
Tell me about your final piece of music then.
I was trying to think what I would have played at my funeral. Not that I ever want this day to arrive too soon, obviously, and I thought I could be really pompous and play, something like Fauré's Requiem, like Mitterrand, have the whole world honouring this great world statesman, or I could be more realistic and play a piece of music as my coffin was led down the aisle to a weeping congregation of something that I thought would encapsulate my basic ethos on life. So I chose Always Look on the Bright Side of Life by Monty Python, which I think should be everybody's ethos.